Farmington, this is Salt Lake checking an audio check.
I don't hear it, but it's still.
This is a test for audio for YouTube. This is a test for audio from YouTube from Salt Lake.
Captions check. Salt Lake, can you give us an audio check, please?
Farmington, this is Salt Lake for an audio check. This is Salt Lake for an audio check.
Thank you, Salt Lake. We're gathering everyone here. We will begin in a minute.
Farmington, we're hearing this in YouTube, so we're good to go.
Yeah, if we can get you to get back together again, we're ready to get started. Do we need a countdown or are we good?
Salt Lake, can you give us a countdown to resume the meeting?
Absolutely. Farmington, we're live in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
We appreciate everyone joining today. We had a slight complication with some equipment, and now we're back streaming live. We'll call for our first agenda item. This is where we have the comment cards can be found in the back there. And if you have a comment, we'll give you 3 minutes to for each person. And we'll start off with agenda item number 5. Trina, if you'll help us, is there any update you'd like to give us? Trina's our cold water sport fish coordinator.
Yes, that is correct. Good morning, everyone. Yes, before we started, I just wanted to take a few minutes just to kind of talk about our process. We have a lot of regulations this round, and just a little bit of explanation about how we came to these, I think might be helpful as we get started. So regulations are a critical tool used by the division as part of our adaptive fisheries management approach. We propose regulations that are intended to help us achieve statewide and water body specific management objectives, and to help us maintain angler satisfaction in the face of ever increasing management challenges. So regulation proposals typically start years in advance. We're collecting objective fisheries data, krill survey data. We're analyzing that data, determining if our goals and objectives are being met just based on what we're seeing on the ground. So the next step then is what you saw the result of in that presentation, is the online angler survey that says, okay, we've developed these regulation proposals. We've used objective fisheries data to develop them. We've talked with our stakeholders, our management teams, and this is what we would like to put forward to the RAC and board meetings. So that angler survey, we're just assessing public support, and it's emailed to over 25,000 licensed anglers. So that is the culmination of many years of preparation in most instances. Sometimes we do receive requests from anglers for regulations. We have a couple today that are the result of that. So the bonus brook trout limit removal, some of the spearfishing changes, and the 6 lines through the ice at Causey, Porcupine, and Pelican. However, implementation of those, so for instance, the group comes to us and said, we'd like more spearfishing opportunities. We take that back to biologists and say, okay, where are good opportunities, or what waters are good places to implement this opportunity? So there is still a biological basis, even if it's brought to us by an angler group. So just in summary, regulations start with biological data, an analysis of the right prescription to meet our goals, and then are vetted through the angler survey as the final measure to ensure that we're on the right track. Now, in an attempt to ensure that surveys provide an unbiased assessment of regulation proposals from the angling community, we distribute surveys to randomly selected license holders. In addition, we distribute the survey to various groups proportional to their representation among licensed Utah anglers. So for example, 15% of licensed Utah anglers are female, so we ensure that 15% of survey recipients were female. Although the vast majority of anglers will not be surveyed in any given year as part of a random representative sampling effort, responses are needed from only a small portion of our licensed anglers for our results to be statistically valid. With over 3,000 anglers responding to the survey this year, our results far exceed the minimum sample size required to have a valid survey result. Further, having a response rate of 15%, which far exceeds the needed response rate, helps us head off issues with response bias. And then finally, you notice there was a lot of regulation proposals having to do with Flaming Gorge Reservoir this year. So the overarching reason for all of our fisheries management actions, including regulations, is to provide Utah's anglers with the most satisfying fishing experience possible. Our effort to establish greater consistency across state lines on the gorge is designed to do just that. So our belief is that consistency in regulations across state boundaries will minimize confusion and limit the likelihood of angler violations at the gorge, thereby increasing their satisfaction with their fishing experience. So the Flaming Gorge regulation changes are really the result and the culmination of nearly 8 years of negotiation and collaborative efforts between our 2 state agencies. And it has been quite the journey, and we are really excited to present these to you today, and we hope that they all meet with your approval. Thanks. And I'll take any questions now.
Thank you, Trina. Great update. And I know it's been a ton of work there, especially with Flaming Gorge and working with Wyoming, and thank you for that effort. That is a big accomplishment, I believe. A question from the board.
I just have a question. We've had a lot of feedback about manning and wondering, well, a bit of feedback about manning. How much of that decision was based off of biological or versus social, and what impact may that have, if any, if it goes?
Yeah, so I would say the decision is predominantly biological. So right now in Manning Meadow, we have a lot of fish. They are growing more slowly. It could use harvest. It certainly would not hurt the population. We also, as you know, I'm sure it's a brood water body for Bonneville cutthroat trout. Our successes in that realm, it's been impressive, right? So we don't need that water body so much for conservation purposes, and it's used more for stocking for sport fish purposes. So between feeling like we can, lift some of the regulation and the restriction a little bit because we are using it more for sport fish purposes now, and then also just knowing that there's plenty of fish in there, even with limited or lower stocking rates, we just felt like we could open that up to opportunity, open it up to more harvest and to more anglers. That was the intent.
So just to follow up on that, Trina, am I thinking correctly? I mean, like, I'm a fly fisherman, I'm a lure fisherman, I'm a bait fisherman, I do them all, but typically when I'm fly fishing for dry flies, I'm kind of a catch and release guy. When I'm fishing with lures, yeah, and bait, I'm usually more of a keeper guy. Anyway. So do we need to take more fish out of there in order to improve the fishery, to help those fish get bigger, stronger, make it more of a sport fishery for the fly guys?
Well, I think with a population like this, you're not going to see that population drive to just full on stunting and super small fish. It's not like that, right? There's not, it is stocked. So I wouldn't say that it would be, devastating if we didn't see increased harvest, but in an instance like this, yes, it would be beneficial to get more fish out. And you probably see better growth. But we do stock it. We could also just pull back on stocking rates too. It is on the lower end, but that is an option too.
Some of the guys I've talked to said that used to be you'd catch some really nice sized fish in there, and now they're 13, 14 inches, a lot smaller. Is that kind of what your studies have shown, through the years?
I don't have the data, but Mike Hadley says, yes, that is what we're seeing. So, and just to what you referred to, there are certain angler groups that harvest, there are certain angler groups that do not harvest. And if you're not allowing the angler groups that harvest, then you're just going to end up stacking fish up in there, right? And their growth will decline. It's just a big fish bowl, right? With limited, finite number of resources.
Okay, thank you.
And if I understand, it's a 2-year, this will be in place for 2 years, correct? And then it can be reevaluated.
Correct. And it is a brood water. So we are there every year and we're keeping an eye on that fishery for sure.
Are you aware of how long it's been size limited just because of the numbers of trout in there? I mean, I've watched the where they swim up that creek. We check that several times every year and have for lots of years. And you used to see some pretty good sized spawners working their way up, and now they're not. There's no big ones. I mean, there's probably are, but I haven't seen any good ones. We used to see a lot of good ones. Is it becoming size limited like some of the other bodies where people aren't keeping fish?
Yes. I don't know how long. And I can't read lips. But we can ask Mike after the meeting, perhaps.
Okay. I did have one other question too, sorry. And it's on the size of the ice hole in Flaming Gorge. I know Wyoming claims they've never had an issue or an incident. This is the one I've had a lot of people personally approach me about and say, okay, you know what? I take my grandkids out there, and if you get a wind and it blows the snow over and crust it, says it scares them to death to have large holes. It scares them to death, especially because lakes have currents, and if you drop through, you may or may not find your hole out. And I just wondered how that process went about, or how, I mean, and maybe we're just fishing Utah, and so ice is never really, I know the Utah side of Flaming Gorge doesn't get ice fished a lot because the ice is often not safe there because of the currents and the largeness of it. But how did that come about? How did the agreement to just relinquish the size of the hole come about?
So they don't have any restrictions statewide, and so it was easier for us to especially where Flaming Gorge is already kind of a unique situation, allowing us a hole up to 18 inches there. So it was just easier for us to make that change and go to their regulation where they, you know, as you mentioned, they have not had an issue. In fact, what they were most concerned about were things like pressure ridges and people crossing thin ice because of springs and upwellings. That was their main concern, but they have not had any issues in the past. I'm sure people, you know, step through, but there's not been any fatalities having to do with the, you know, the lack of restriction. Otherwise, I'm sure they would have one.
Trina, one of our, actually, I'll wait till afterwards. Any other questions before? We'll go to the racks. Any questions for the rack chairs? Do we have racks online? Yeah, they're there. I guess they can raise a hand if they have something now. Okay, we have no questions for the public during this meeting, so we'll ask Director Shirley to give us an update from the electronic public comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Agenda item 5, 2025 fishing recommendations and R657-13 rule amendments. We had 13 votes come in, 7 strongly or somewhat agreed with the division's recommendation and 6 somewhat or strongly disagreed. The main themes, which I think I've listed them all here pretty much, there were 4 comments in opposition with removing the artificial fly and lure only restriction from Manning Meadow and Barney reservoirs in the southern region. These are treasures for fly and lure anglers and provide an opportunity to not have to compete with bait anglers. 3 comments that do not support allowing spearfishing at night and the use of light for chubs. These changes will result in large trout being taken during a vulnerable time and will allow for exploitation of walleye. We had a couple comments in support for increasing access for spearfishing anglers, and that the division should consider expanding access to Gunlock, Quail Creek, and Sand Hollow with so few spearfishing opportunities being available in southern Utah. Comments in support for the recommendation to leave walleye and Echo Reservoir and to not allow spearfishing for spawning females. Interest in largemouth bass fishing is increasing, and the division should stock more largemouth bass in waters they currently stock and consider adding largemouth bass to additional waters. A comment that is not in the best interest of anglers to allow 24-hour spearfishing or year-round spearfishing. A comment that chumming is unsportsmanlike and shouldn't be allowed. A comment, consider cutting the bonus brook trout limit in half before doing away with it altogether. A comment that was opposed to lowering the hook limit from 15 to 8 for set lines, and that the division should open more waters to set lining. Frustration expressed by one angler on the high number of recommendations being proposed all at once, and that it's hard for the board and RAC to adequately consider each one due to the quantity of changes. And the last comment, the Utah Angler Coalition submitted and supports all the recommendations with the exception of removing the current size restriction for ice holes at Flaming Gorge due to public safety concerns. That's it.
Thank you, Jay. Okay, we'll go to our rack chairs for comments. Austin, let's start with you.
Sounds good. So on this agenda item, we had 2 motions in the southern region. The first motion passed unanimously to keep artificial fly lure only regulations in place for Manning Meadows and Barney reservoirs, but accept the proposal for the increased limits at these 2 reservoirs. And the second motion also passed unanimously, and that was to accept the remainder of this proposal with the exception of the change to the ice hole size at Flaming Gorge. We wanted to keep that in place, and that was it.
Thank you, Austin. Grizz?
We also had 2 motions in our region. The first one was to accept as presented by the division, except for the Manning Meadow and Barney Lake ones, in which we voted on that one separately. That motion passed unanimously. The second motion was to accept the 4 fish limit increase and keep the artificial flies and lure on Barney Lake and Manning Meadows, and that passed unanimously.
Thank you. Eric?
Southeastern region had a few motions. The first one passed unanimously. That motion was to accept the proposed changes in regulations on Flaming Gorge. There was 2 motions that failed. One was not to accept the change at Echo Reservoir, and the second was to not accept the recommendations on Manning Meadow and Barney Lake. Both of those motions failed. The last motion was made to accept the remainder of the division's proposal, and that passed 9-1.
Thank you. Brock?
Yeah, the Central Region had 3 motions. All 3 motions passed unanimously. The first motion was to not accept the division's proposal to remove the 18-inch limit, hull size limit on Flaming Gorge. The second motion was to ask the Wildlife Board to consider an action log item to monitor the take by spear anglers and the impact that they have on the fishery with those large fish at night. And then the final motion was to accept the remainder of the division's recommendations as presented.
Thank you. Brad?
In the northern region, we had just one motion that was to approve the 2025 fishing recommendations and rule amendments as presented. That passed unanimously.
Thank you. Just a little clarification. We had I think we had the central and southeast region voted not to change the size of the hole of the ice hole at Flaming Gorge, to keep it at the 18 inches it is today. The other 3, I think, were on board with it. And then we had three racks that had the southern region, the southeast region, and the northeast region voted to keep the fly lure at Manning Meadows and Barney Lake. With 2 of those, the southern region, the northeast region, both voted to increase the proposed limit there, so to do something there. And then we had the central region asked the Wildlife Board to consider an action log item to monitor the take by spear anglers, other impact on the fishery. I think that covers it. Okay. Let's talk about these in probably at least 3 different ones. I think we need to talk about the spear fishery one. We've got comments. Let's go to the comments first. Thank you. Let's start with Mike Kennedy. If you don't mind, come up to this mic over here.
Yeah, you might have had a minute.
Steve, come over to this mic over here if you don't mind. State your name, and then we'll give you 3 minutes to tell us your input.
We have so many of the same goals. We support healthy fish populations. We support access to waters. We support the Division of Wildlife Resources. And I just ask you guys to think about spear fishermen more in the context of anglers. And when there's an opportunity for people, traditional anglers, to take a fish, that spear anglers would also like to take a fish. And to the degree that that's biologically sustainable, we don't think that's an unreasonable request. The other thing is that the State Division of Outdoor Recreation also has this mandate to make Utah such a world-class place for access. And this is a place where when we're increasing access for spear anglers, we're kind of a niche group, but we're growing mightily, giving spear anglers access that's in line with other departments within the state. So as it relates to the specific proposals on the table for all the fishing regulations, the Utah Spearos aren't just in favor of the spear regulations, but we are also in favor of the broader fishing proposals that have been put out there. And we're stakeholders with the Utah Anglers Coalition. We've been attending the RAC meetings. This has been these broad by all of those organizations, and the broader fishing population group anglers has supported these spear fishing regulations between like 70 and 90+%. And so, okay, you just hold it for me. This is great service. I just want to make the point that spearfishing in the way that it's being proposed is biologically sustainable. It's also supported by the stakeholders and by the general fishing population. I also just want to mention one of the proposals that came out of the RACs, which we think is a really cool idea, and that is to do a better job of surveying and understanding spearfishing. We support a stamp, maybe a free stamp, which is just like, so the division could more easily get harvest data from us. Certainly there would be other ideas that the division might have about how to do that. And we also, I recognize I'm just on time here. We also support working with the division on opening up some of these other waters, like in the southern part of the state. There are proposals to increase the take of bass because the bass are getting overpopulated and maybe a little bit stunted. And Spearos would appreciate the opportunity to be a part of that. We think that we can be a part of the broader trends that the division is trying to accomplish. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Ryan Peterson, you're up, and on deck is Mike Kendi.
Good morning. My name is Ryan Peterson. I am president of our local group here in Utah, Utah Spearos. I'll start by correcting one thing that Steve said is our membership is actually now closer to 500 members rather than 3. We're growing quickly. But it has been our privilege in the spearfishing community to work closely with key members of the Division of Wildlife Resources over the past couple of years as they have worked to develop the proposed changes to Utah's fishing regulations when it comes to underwater spearfishing. And we as a group support the proposed changes for not only the spearfishing, but the rest of the fishing regulations as proposed by the division today. We hope to continue this partnership and work with the division over the next regulation cycle to present additional changes to regulations for underwater spearfishing in Utah. The amount of fishermen participating in underwater spearfishing is growing quickly. The number of members in our group alone has doubled over the last year. Under the current regulations, only a limited number of waters are open to underwater spearfishing for game fish, the most common of which are also very popular amongst recreational boaters. And with both spearfishermen and recreational boaters growing in numbers, the limited waters we have access to are becoming increasingly congested. This poses a serious safety risk, especially during the peak times of the year when lakes are filled with boats, swimmers, and other recreational users. If more lakes were opened to spearfishing, this would spread out the activity and give us more alternative places to dive when the boating traffic is high, as well as spread out the pressure on fish populations and the growing number of spearfishermen would be spread out across more bodies of water. There are also parts of the state with very little spearfishing opportunities, more specifically certain areas of southern, southeastern, and northern Utah that have little to no spearfishing waters within a reasonable traveling distance. It's for these reasons that on behalf of the spearfishing community, I would like to ask the board to task the Division of Wildlife Resources to develop a list of additional waters that would be suitable for underwater spearfishing to be proposed in the next regulation cycle, as well as any other additional changes to current regulations and the wording of them to make them more easily understood and to correct any contradictions in the guidebook. I would also like to comment on the monitoring of take by spearfishermen that has been discussed. We would be in favor of a method to monitor the take and impact of spearfishing on fish populations. We want all regulations to be based off science and hard data. So in closing, we're very grateful to all those who have assisted in bringing changes forward for 2025 and look forward to the continued cooperation with the division and other local angling groups to improve Utah's fisheries for all anglers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Mike Kennedy, and then will be Ronald Dunn.
Want to thank Ryan and Steve. Ryan's built Utah Spearos from the ground up to get those 500. The sport's grown. I represent NFSA, which stands for the National Freshwater Spearfishing Association. And so we're over all the freshwater spearfishing in the United States. And the flagship is here in Utah. And thanks to the DNR for the rules that you guys have passed, a lot of our tournaments are held in Utah. The World Championship was here in 2023. In 2023, we took out 20 tons of carp in 2023. 2024, we did about half of that. So the stamp they were talking about is if you ever want to build something, and we can put it on our site, we put it everywhere, people, hey, how much carp did you take out? And everybody just put in their totals. We can tell you, hey, this year we've done this much. So if you want to build something, we'll be glad to put that in there so you can see numbers that we're taking or doing. Because you'll see on the trout limit, there'll be 20,000, carp, and on trout, it's going to be, hey, between all of us, we got 13, or 23. They're hard to get. I do want to thank Craig and many of you guys for the rules that you are passing for us in doing this, because nationwide, this is a growing sport. Michigan just took off, so we're allowed spearfishing in Michigan. Arkansas, now it is just whatever fishing regulation is in whatever lake, that is the new rule in Arkansas starting this next coming year. And that's really kind of our goal is going to be here in Utah, to allow us to be able to spear wherever we go. But the nice thing about a Spearo is we do know the fish. I don't shoot bass. It's me, who I am. I know Ryan's the same way. But at the same time, I clean up all the trash I find, all the beer cans, all the stuff we find under the water, because that's our world. And we like to keep our world clean underneath. So Spearo is a great group, great people for lakes, because we enjoy the regulations as much as anybody else. But also, it is nice to be able to cook something up for our family, and people go out at night and they fish. I think that's more of what they're trying to get at. If you put some regs out, hey, one trout then at night or whatever, fine. Doesn't matter much. There's not much to see at night anyway, because it's hard to see underwater as it is. Most visibility for us, I've been trying to get some info for Rockport for one of the officers here for years. And every time I go, this year, the visibility has been this much. I was planning to go Monday, 80 feet down, because we lost a gun down there, but it's the same spot he wants me to dive. And still haven't been able to go. But a lot of these, it all depends on viz. So we don't even get to see in half these places. But I am grateful for what and how much we're progressing here in Utah for spearfishing. And then we will be hosting what is called JAWS, the Junior American, well, it's the underwater spearfishing for all juniors 18 and under. And that will be at Fish Lake on August 1st and 2nd. If any of you want to participate, come see that, have kids. You'll see a lot of the youth coming in learning. And everything we go after is usually what the DNR officers say, hey, we need the perch, we need the carp out this lake. And that's what we're going after in our competitions. But thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Ron, and then Ronald, and then Ken Strong.
Good morning. I'm Ronald Dunn, representing the Utah Anglers Coalition. The Utah Anglers Coalition, also known as UAC, is a statewide association of varied angling interests dedicated to the protection, enhancement, and enjoyment of Utah's aquatic resources and angling opportunities. Recently, UAC met with the division to discuss at length the proposed regulation changes for 2025. UAC supports all of the proposed changes to the 2025 fishing regulations, except for removal of the current size restriction on the ice holes at Flaming Gorge Reservoir. Some of our members are opposed to this regulation change due to their concerns about public safety with unrestricted hole size. Because our organization operates by consensus, we are therefore taking no official position on this single regulation change. Thank you.
Thank you. Ken? And these are last one.
Ken Strong with Sportsman for Fish and Wildlife. I want to thank all of you for your service, the travels you have to make, and all you do. And I want to thank Drew Cushing for what he's doing in fishing and working to improve fishing all the way. And I'm glad, and hopefully it'll go through with the new center in Logan that can do disease control and different things that they want to build. But on the ice hole, it is being done to keep Wyoming happy. And it seems like we're always trying to keep Wyoming happy, and they don't care about us. And that really bothers me. You talk about an 18-inch hole that we have now in regulation. It must be a giant fish if it can't fit through an 18-inch hole. And we think that it's a safety issue because on the Wyoming side, the lake freezes faster. It's not as deep. And so it freezes much faster. On the Utah side, it's deeper. It doesn't freeze as fast. And in some places, it doesn't freeze at all. So if you go out there on the Utah side and you cut a hole, and you can cut as big a hole as you want, but say somebody goes by 10 by 10 foot hole so that everybody can sit around the same hole and fish. Then that night it gets cold and puts a light, small layer of ice over that hole, and it snows. And then the next day somebody goes out with their family and they don't know where it's at, and they go out there and they can fall through the ice real easy. And we're talking about kids here. And in all reality, an 18-inch hole will cover any fish that's in Flaming Gorge. And so there's no need to take that out and let them go unlimited, because to us, it's a safety issue, and we do not want to lose people in that ice. See, the Utah side that freezes later, it doesn't freeze as thick, and that's the concern. Wyoming's different because they shallower, they freeze faster, it gets thicker ice. On Utah, that's just doesn't happen. So that's our concern. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. Trent, is there any update or anything you'd like to visit about what you heard from the public comments? I guess I got one question, just to go back with what Ken was just telling us. And I think he's on spot on as far as the Flaming Gorge and the way the lake is there. But Wyoming, if I'm not mistaken, didn't I hear you say that they're unlimited hole size statewide?
Yeah, they just don't have a restriction.
So they're doing it, not just Flaming Gorge, they're doing it all their bodies of water, and they haven't had any issues or problems?
Not to their knowledge. So when I asked my counterpart in Wyoming, he said, in our collective memory, we have not had any issues, and then went on to talk about where they do see issues, right? The pressure ridges and springs and things like that.
Okay, thank you. Other questions
One
for?
question about that, just questions that I've been asked. Was there any discussion with regard to Wyoming not having a restriction? Was there discussion on the fact that most of Wyoming is colder earlier and for a lot longer than Utah is? So ice can form faster and thicker in Wyoming throughout most of the state. Now, we are just talking about one body of water and it's shallower on the Wyoming side, but was there any discussion about that at all?
We did not have a discussion about that. To be honest, of all of the proposed changes, we did not foresee this one being the one that that people had the major concerns about. We thought this would be a little bit easier for folks to stomach. So a lot of those conversations that maybe should have happened did not happen. I will say though that, you know, even on Flaming Gorge Reservoir, I believe it was last year, maybe 2 years ago, even in Wyoming, there can be unsafe ice, right? So ice is never entirely safe, and we do hope that everyone stays safe out there, and it is on folks to make sure that they and their family are being safe out there.
Other questions for Trina?
Is it a problem to have a different regulation? Like, I mean, because I know in our agreement with them, we can fish the Wyoming side, they can fish the Utah side. Kind of stuff. Is it a problem to have a 18-inch in Utah, not worry about Wyoming since they don't?
That one's not probably as big of a deal. I mean, it's definitely better to have more consistency, right? There's just an arbitrary line, definitely a man-made line that separates, you know, one state from the other. And if you're fishing near that line, it could cause confusion. I think the bag limits are probably where it's more important to have consistency, because you can go between the two states, and with two different bag limits, you can imagine that being an issue. Hole size, I'm sure people can live with that.
Bryce?
I just got a little comment. I mean, I've been on some of these reservoirs, you know, on snowmobiles before, and you know where to watch out for the springs. They're usually in the same place every year. You know, the ridges, sometimes you don't know where somebody cut a 10 by 10 hole. So, and you know, it barely froze over. So I would be really nervous. I think 18 inches is.
I'd hate to personally cut a 10 by 10 hole. That's a lot of work trying to get all that ice out of there.
The other thing that Wyoming mentioned was just what they tend to see is the clover leaf. So folks are taking the 10-inch auger and just in a diamond shaped pattern, right? So it ends up being a larger hole, but it's typically tends to be about 18 to 20 inches. So that was the other part of the conversation that didn't seem like we were really that far off. It's just one is regulated, the other is not.
Other questions for Trina?
Would it be realistic at all, where you have the Barney Lake and Manning's close together, to keep the artificial lure restriction on the one and remove it off the other, and just to allow the fish population to flourish more?
That was discussed in the southern region, and law enforcement did come up and talk about how having the two the same, because they are so close together, they're about 2 miles apart, having the regulations the same there would make it easier for law enforcement to manage those water bodies. So that was the discussion there.
Trina, I guess I got a question on the central region, when they had a motion to ask us to consider an action log item or something to allow some kind of reporting from spear fishermen or their impact on the fishery. Have you guys discussed that? Have you guys got any ideas that would help with that?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. We do krill surveys, and we have krill days selected randomly, right? We just take, say, 6 days a month, 8 days a month, and for however long we do the krill, usually up to a year. And to my knowledge, we have never krilled a spear angler. And as a krill technician, sometimes when I was the manager, I'm always looking, right? Like, those are the people that we want to talk to because we don't have a lot of information and we just have not been able to contact them. There's just not that many. And it sounds like they're increasing in numbers. So maybe that will change just based on numbers. But what we could do, I think we get, for all of our online surveys, we ask people, do you participate in spearfishing? Do you participate in lure fishing? And ask people how they identify. A lot of folks will say multiple, but we can take all of those individuals that say they participate in spearfishing and just try to work with them. We have their email addresses for most of those, and we can communicate effectively with them probably without having to go through like a larger stamp process or something like that. And just have that be one of our assignments over the next year or so, is just to try to reach out and see what kind of numbers they're harvesting, where, and what species.
Mr. Chairman, I asked a question that has been posed to me by members of the public, and now I kind of like to go, I guess, quasi-personal with Flaming Gorge. I have a son and daughter-in-law and their family. They live in Wyoming and they fish Flaming Gorge. And his comment to me, and I believe this is valid, is coming out of Wyoming, whatever regulation there is, they fish the gorge and they cross the border, with the reciprocal permit. They like the idea of having one regulation for both sides of the border, because once you get out on the lake, it's kind of hard to know right where the border's at. And they like the idea of having one regulation, whether it's ice fishing or whatever, just one set of rules for that lake. And that's just a comment from my boy is all.
Thank you. Gary?
I think some of the reservations people have about the take on spearfishing is from those early pictures of those first fishing derbies or contests they had in Fish Lake and slayed all those really big fish, size of a lifetime kind of fish. And there was piles of them after that derby that had been taken out of the lake. And I know that alarmed a lot of people about spearfishing. I don't think that's completely recovered. I think that's where the Central Region comment came of, we need to monitor the take somehow. And I do think that's a good idea, and also, I don't, that's entirely possible with year-round fishing. You can catch them when they're spawning. You can do stuff like that, where before with the season dates, it didn't used to happen that way. But I'm a fan of devising a way to monitor what's happening with it. But like I say, that's because I still have a mental picture of those pictures of all those big fish, that were taken out of the lake in 2 days or whatever it was. So.
Yeah, they are still a small number, right? Even 500 when you've got, I think the last number I heard was that in 2024, we sold 438,000 fishing licenses. So they are still a small percentage, but yes, when you see things like that, that definitely kind of instigates an emotional response from people. And just remember though, that spear anglers are anglers and they are subject to the same daily bag limit as everyone else. And so if we're seeing more harvest on a water body and specific to larger fish, then that's probably an overall regulation change that needs to happen. So again, it would be probably beneficial to get a feel for, and we've talked about this, getting a feel for overall exploitation rates at many of our water bodies, not just from spear anglers. So we can't do a krill survey on every water body every year. They're just time and labor intensive. And we have tagging studies and other methods that are kind of up and coming to try to get at those numbers. So exploitation, you're right, 100% is super important for us to be able to set daily bag limits and make sure that we're not having over harvest conditions.
Mr. Chair, I know our time passed. Would you allow me to ask a question?
Yes, I would.
Thank you. With this monitoring, is it possible to do something similar to our harvest reporting that we do with big game, where they log in, they report their harvest online? Seems like a very viable option. I don't know, if that creates a lot of headache for the division, but something that might be looked into.
Yep. So we've had great success with like the Flaming Gorge Reservoir Creel Survey. The biologists up there develop an app through Survey 123 where they could just on the water enter the information. Once they get back in cell service, it automatically uploads. I believe that because it's through our ArcGIS accounts, we can have external people. We can give them username and password that's specific to their group and create a form for them in Survey 123 and share that with the people that we're interested in hearing from. And they can, on the water that day before they forget, share with us their harvest information, location, date, even, time spent on the water, that sort of thing. So it is definitely possible. And we do have online tools like he's suggesting that would be very helpful with that.
But it's more of a volunteer basis, right? Not a mandatory thing.
Right.
I think that would be a good idea too. I mean, I think anything we can get in the line of reporting is good. Other questions?
Just kind of a comment. I think that's a good thing. And I appreciate the comments today where you brought up that you're very supportive of monitoring and are willing to help out with that. So I think that's fantastic, and a great resource to reach out to. I think they'd be all on board of getting on that survey or whatever needs to be done there. So I think that's great. And then another thought I had too on that tournament, if we got all of the anglers to show all their fish for those 2 days, I bet it would be pretty impressive too. And it might blow our minds how many fish come out of there, not just from spear, but from all other anglers. So, I mean, it's kind of a hard thing to gauge because it is emotional. You see something like that, and it might blow your mind a little bit. But if we saw all the fish that came out of there, it'd probably really blow our mind.
Any other questions for Trina before we bring it back for the board for discussion? Any other RAC chair questions, concerns?
Sorry, I did have a quick thought. Back to Manning and Barney, how many in the southern region lure and bait or non-bait fisheries do we have?
So we have 6 total with Manning Meadow and Barney in the southern region, and we have 33 total statewide artificial fly and lures.
Do I have a chance to know how many total fisheries we have in southern and in state? That's a big ask, and I did not prepare that.
No, sorry, I could have that later, but I don't.
No, that's fine. I just wondered percentage. It does seem like a small number of, and sometimes I can get the lure of an area that is kind of unique and pristine, I guess. Yeah. But I also do get the biological side where it's not really necessary to keep it a lure.
I think you're good.
But based off those comments, I mean, you said that you could possibly just quit the stocking and maybe get the same outcome.
I don't think we would quit the stocking, but we could reduce numbers.
Reduce it. Well, you said it was already really minimal to begin with, right? But almost non-existent, right? I guess.
Yeah, we could
kind of get the same outcome. Just keep the artificial and.
Yeah, it would take a little longer, right, to be able to dial in that appropriate stocking rate. But yeah, I think what you're trying to do is just to increase the resources available to the fish that are in there. So to be able to do that, you just need to either remove some or ensure that there's fewer over time. So you can imagine that the ones in there would have to naturally die out. So this offers a process that would happen more quickly, probably, if people stepped up to harvest.
I have a question. How many fish caught on artificial flies and lures and released end up dying? Is that a big percentage or a small percentage? Does anybody know that?
There definitely been studies. I don't know those numbers. It is, I think I can say for sure that it is more fish caught on bait will die after being caught and released. But again, I think most bait anglers are probably harvest oriented. So I don't have that number, but it is fewer, right? If you're just using one hook or even a treble hook, it's going to be more likely to be caught on the side of the mouth rather than being even just taken down like a bait hook.
I have one more question for you. If we increase the bag limit, would that accomplish the same thing instead of changing the bait? Because I wonder, because a lot of the people, I mean, it's a cool place and they're there for the ambiance of the location as much as the fish. But the fishing rush, the people that come catch fish and take them home is pretty much done by July. I mean, and I had this discussion with the director a little earlier, people that are there that would normally harvest, we call it meat fishing. That's part of their routine is I'll go to Otter Creek and bring home some really big ones. But I'm not sure that'll have the impact we want it to by just increasing the limit, but I could go either way.
I think people would have to harvest more to get the impact that you'd want. So
yeah,
that's the if, right?
Any other questions? Okay, I think on this one, I think there's at least 3 topics that we want to discuss before we go to a vote for the entire package. The 3 that I'm thinking of is one of them is the spearfish reporting, ice hole size at Flaming Gorge, and Matty Meadows / Barney Lake changes. Is there any other topics that we need to?
On the spearfish reporting, wouldn't we have to put that as an action item and then give the division time to figure something out, or can we actually make that decision today?
I think we would.
Okay.
Good catch. Thank you. All right, so let's somebody talk about which one you want to talk about first.
So you want to talk about each one first? And
Let's talk about it, make a motion on it, and then talk about the next one, make a motion on it.
So I guess in the interest of time and ease and getting one out of the way, let's talk about the spearfishing.
Okay, let's do it.
So the proposal came out of the Central Region RAC to ask the division, to put on the action log to ask the division to look at ways of studying the impact of spearfishing and find ways to maybe track that. Do we need to have a discussion on that, or you just want a motion to do that and go with that, and then we can move along?
Let's hear a motion, and then if somebody wants to change it, we can.
I'd almost say can't too, or to possibly look at maybe seeing if there was, added opportunities for them in some of these areas down south where there's, more fish they're trying to get rid of. So, study the wide spectrum, not just what they're doing bad, but if there's room for other growth.
Yeah. You want to make the motion, Bryce? Okay. Okay, I'll take a stab at it. I'll make a motion that we put on the action log, ask the division to study the possibilities of increased opportunity for spear fishermen in Utah, look at different bodies of water and maybe every fishery in the state of Utah and look at the possibility of expanding opportunity for them. And also to come up with a plan and look at ideas of studying the impact of spearfishing on angling as a whole.
I'll second that.
Okay, I'm looking over at Stacy. Have you got that, Stacy?
I didn't get hit with an M&M, so I think we're okay.
Okay, does everybody understand what the motion was? I'm not going to restate it, so I got to see if you know it. We got a motion, we got a second by Gary. Motion by Kent. Any discussion prior to our vote? All right, we'll start down with you, Kent.
Yes.
Yes, and thank you for those that came and commented and shared your input. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Motion passes unanimous. Thank you. Okay, what other topic we want to talk about next? Ice hole size or Manning Meadow / Barney Lake proposed changes.
Get rid of the ice holes.
I've got a joke my dad used to tell me about a polar bear and how you catch one. I'm not going to tell it. All right, ice hole. Let's talk about the ice hole changes or proposed changes at Flaming Gorge.
I think we leave it the way it is. It's been fine. I don't think we need bigger ones. Nobody likes a big one.
If I'm not mistaken, what Trina told us, Trina, you said that basically you're taking maybe like an 8-inch auger, doing a hole, and then doing a 4 around that. So now you got a 20-inch hole, or because they got to overlap a little bit. A 20 by 20-inch hole instead of an 18 by 18-inch hole.
But like Kent said, they could drill in a big circle and make it as big as they want.
Right. I don't know anybody that would even do that. I don't know why you'd do that unless you're trying to get the ice out of the hole for storage. I mean, I know they used to do that kind of stuff back in the days when they didn't have refrigerators, but.
So were you just suggesting to up it to 20 inches so that they could do their 10?
No, I think,
together?
no, I think, no,
Or is
no, I
this a
think
comment?
that's what I heard her tell us, that's what they were doing is, which exceeds our 18-inch hole is something that size, which I don't know anybody drills an 18-inch hole right now. I don't catch fish that big, but somebody I'm sure does. But I think it isn't. It sure helps our COs if we have the same regulations on bodies of water and not split them. So I understand the division's recommendation on this. It is a lot easier on them and easier on our public so that you don't have a little kid out there getting in trouble because he's crossed the line and done something on one side that he can't do on the other. So I understand that. I understand the impact.
I get that too. And I don't know how many people dig a big hole. I heard a joke once a long time ago, goes along with what you said, a friend and I went ice fishing, but we didn't catch nothing because by the time we got a hole in the ice big enough for the boat, we didn't want to fish no more. But so is that something, I guess, Trina, you could answer this. Is that something that Wyoming has noticed, that there's great big giant holes in the ice, or are they just people self-regulate and they're 16, 18-inch holes anyway?
So just in my interactions that he did not mention, that was something that they've noticed, that they're doing the clover leaf about 18 to 20 inches. And that's the typical trophy lake trout angler. And that's typically what they're doing. They're not necessarily like making larger holes. Just because it's not regulated doesn't mean that, they have to. I think people are still going to make the smallest hole possible with the smallest or the least amount of effort possible, right? To get to be able to bring a fish that big through the hole.
So maybe we're getting ourselves all worked up over something that really isn't something to get worked up over.
Yeah, Wyoming doesn't sound like they're worked up at it at any place in their state.
Yeah, that's the one I got the most response from people from. numerous people, especially the older guys that are taking their grandkids ice fishing and stuff. They were very concerned about the size of the hole. Verging on paranoid, you know, because a lot of lakes, you're out there on your snowmobile, your four-wheeler, you know, you're paddling along, you know, you get the wind blows all the time, every time it gets light or dark, and so it blows snow over the top. I mean, 18 seems like plenty to me, and I realize it'd be easier because, you know, the line's going to be a little fuzzy, and I'm sure the COs would take that into consideration, but we're tasked with taking care of ours and our people, then I think 18's good.
Hear a motion?
Nobody makes a motion. We don't have to talk about it. We can just go on to the next, right?
Oh, actually, I'll take a stab at a motion, just since the discussion seems to have stalled. If this motion's out of line, tell me, Stacy, and I'll change it. But I would make a motion that we just go ahead and accept the division's proposal with regard to ice holes on Flaming Gorge. But we also would like the division to study that and keep track of it and monitor it to the best of their ability for the next year and come back with us and report next year.
Do I have a second?
I'm not sure how they would study and track it. What do you mean exactly by that?
Just, you know, like, that is a good question, but just try to gather intel, you know, just in their interaction with anglers, and maybe it's online or something, just to find out what size of holes people are using and what it looks like, and whether or not there's become an increased danger on the lake because of larger holes in the ice.
If there's larger holes in the ice.
If there's larger holes, if people are cutting great big holes, you know, 24 to 36 inches or whatever, you know, like that.
So just to clarify, you want to go with the division's recommendation with the bigger holes and study it?
Yeah, and report back in 1 year.
And I guess I was just thinking, you know, when you said report back by going out, I mean, it's pretty easy to tell where an ice hole has been drilled. So I could go out there once a week or so and just kind of, I see where people have been fishing and see what size holes we're getting. And I guess that's how I was thinking when you said study. How to have our biologists do that periodically.
That's more or less, you know, whatever it takes. Not anything really a huge, this is a specific effort, but just keep track of what it is, you know, with the biologist or conservation officers.
Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, I got a question. So if that's the direction he wants to go, we would approve it with the division's recommendations. Now we're only making a recommendation if we go against what they.
Yeah, I think his idea was that since this is a kind of a hot topic, to add one more step and ask the division to come back within a year and report to us and see if we made if there's any kind of a problem with it.
I saw you raise your hand, Trina. Did you have a comment?
I was just thinking that what we could do, we participate in numerous activities up there, tournaments, derbies throughout the winter, right? We're trying to encourage people to harvest burbot, harvest lake trout, and we have a major effort there. So that's just a question that we could add. We'll talk to hundreds of anglers through those efforts. And so that could just be a question that we add to folks who fish, you know, lower down in the reservoir, especially, or just anyone and everyone, and just kind of determine size and did you have any issues, that sort of thing. So that could easily be added to the questions that we're already talking to folks about.
From the division standpoint, because of all the monitoring that happens at Flaming Gorge, is this a perceived problem if the ice holes are unlimited? for you guys. I mean, I'd say that it was people, was a safety issue with people. It wasn't fish, wasn't any, it was a safety issue.
Yeah, so our concern is similar to Wyoming's. We're concerned with people crossing pressure ridges and with thinner ice where springs are welling up. That's our biggest concern. So this, I guess we don't really feel like people are going to start making huge holes. Again, it's human nature, I think, to probably just as little work as possible to get you that right hole size to bring the fish through, right? So that was our thought, and our concern will always be pressure ridges and springs.
So I had a buddy tell me that back east, they like to cut holes with chainsaws.
Yeah.
Do they think they could start doing that here? I wish he would have talked to the anglers first and then brought this to us and asked, the questions, surveyed them up there, and then brought this, not make a change and then go ask them.
Yeah. I think this is certainly one of those where we could have used some additional feedback, live and learn.
Okay, we do have a motion on the table. I haven't heard a second. Do we have a second?
I was a little hesitant, but where she agreed that it wouldn't be too hard to try and monitor, then I will second it.
Okay. So I think the motion is to accept the division proposal of unlimited ice hole with the idea that we do for the next year. There's a study being done and a report back to us within a year. Is that okay? Any discussion? Okay, we'll start with you, Kent. Yes.
Yes.
No.
No.
All right, Brett. They like
figure
filling
out-
that seat.
I was trying to figure out a way to make you decide, but I'll
Yeah.
go with yes.
Oh, okay. I don't know why you'd want to do that to me, but thank you. Yeah, the motion carries. Okay, the next topic we want to talk about is the Manning Meadows, Barney Lake proposed changes. Let's discuss that.
One quick question on that I have, was there, I guess, Trina, was there any kind of a public clamor or people approaching the division about wanting to, pushing hard to be able to use bait up there? Or is this just something that came from the division?
No, this wasn't, this didn't come from the public or an angler group. This was just from our surveys and from the operations at our broodwater, just seeing what's happening with the fishery, and that they are definitely smaller and smaller and more of them.
So it sounds like it's strictly biological that you want to do this, and these are just some options that are out there as to go with bait and take more fish.
Yeah, we tend to see opening up opportunity to more anglers is that's something that we try to do, right? So it definitely seemed like the better option.
So my thoughts, I kind of made some comments earlier, but I do like the intrigue and allure of having a artificial only. There's not a whole lot of them. I think they told me, 6 down in the southern region, and that's not too many of all the other fisheries. So it's kind of nice to have something pristine and unique. However, if the fish are declining in quality and things are not, it used to be known for a big fishery, and it seems like that's declining. So something should probably change for a bit. My thoughts is maybe change it for now for the 2 years, let some fish be taken out and go back. As long as it will go back.
Kent, I know you want to say something.
Well, going along with what Paula said, would it be doable, I guess, to do that, open it up to bait fishing for 2 years, but then come back with a larger bag limit on the back end of that to keep, so we ain't in the same cycle.
So move it back to lower fishing or to artificial flies
back
and
to
lures and then go
artificial.
back with a bigger, larger bag limit.
With a larger bag limit to maybe try to find the happy medium with it so you're not going back and forth. Because I'm with Paula. There's not a lot of fisheries in the southern region that have an artificial fly and lure only restriction, and it's kind of nice for the guys that just want to do that, the people that just want to do that, to have a place that's their spot that they go.
Director Shirley.
Yeah.
You're a law enforcement guy. If lakes are 2 or 3 miles apart, is that an enforcement nightmare? There's another lake that's maybe another mile further than that. That's just regular in the Box Creek stuff. It seems like if it's signed and posted, we could keep one artificial and the one where we needed to increase the take, we could do that a couple of years and see what happened. Is that a law enforcement nightmare?
Yeah, I will try to address that. And if Chad has any additional feedback, he can chime in. But I think we've kind of crossed the threshold with a lot of our fisheries that are water specific, that an individual angler needs to know what he's doing when he goes out. And so I don't know about the proximity of the two reservoirs, whether that makes a difference other than, the officer. We always run into the situation of, well, I caught these fish here. I've been fishing at Strawberry and now I'm fishing somewhere else, regardless of distance. I think that's a bigger concern than the fact of the proximity of the two reservoirs having the same regulation.
Paula, I like your idea. I think it would, because I say we've got a lot of lakes now, we're only stocking sterile fish because nobody's taking them. And so to maintain the health of the fishery, we're just putting fish that can't reproduce. And this is a viable population that continues to reproduce. I think to thin them out and invigorate the ecosystem would be a good idea. And if we did it 2 years and then had a look at it, and then I even like, not even, but I like Kent's suggestion of maybe, or one of you going back to just maybe an increased take and go back to in artificial lures and try and maintain it at that healthy level. And like I say, it's interesting with Manning because every spring they have an absolute pulse on how the fishery is doing because they collect eggs. And so I think it'll be a very easy one to monitor without a lot of extra work. So I like your proposal.
Any other discussion? Ready for a motion?
I make a motion that we accept the division's proposal on Manning and Barney reservoirs and look at it in 2 years.
I'll second it.
Yeah, we got a motion and a second. I think it's pretty straightforward. Brett, we'll start with you. Not put the pressure on you this time.
Yes.
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 Okay. Any other items on this particular action item before we go to an overall acceptance of the balance of it? Okay, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion that we accept the balance of the proposal by the division.
Second.
Motion by Gary, second by Bryce. Let's start with Fred again.
Yes.
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 Thank you. Thank you, Trina, and thanks for all the work you've done there, especially working with Wyoming. I know that was a big deal to get together and a long time in coming. So, all right, we'll move on to action item number 6, evaluation of real property interest. Chelsea?
Hi, everybody. I'll just keep this really short. Thank you all for watching my presentation and the wonderful discussion we had on the RAC tour. These proposed rule changes would provide both DWR staff and the public with a clearer understanding of the process for land acquisition, disposals, and exchanges of real property. There are many additional laws that DWR must comply with, so the purpose of this recommendation is not to materially change how DWR acquires, sells, or exchanges land, but rather provide more detail and clarity to the existing process.
All right, any questions?
Yeah, Chelsea, I gave you a heads up that this question was coming, if you recall. With regard to land transfers and purchasing land, the division trying to get a hold of land for a WMA or something, there's lands that could be sold, like we'll use, for instance, the SITLA decides they're going to divest some land and they want to sell it. We have restrictions currently, the way I understand it, the division does, with how much they can spend. You know, it's the real value or whatever current value of a property. I have a concern looking at that with maybe an outside group, a non-consumptive group, or Native American tribe or Chinese CCP or whatever coming in and just astronomically outbidding the division to take away what once was essentially public land and lock that up, and we lose the opportunity to grow wildlife and have public recreation on that land. Is there any mechanism in place or been any discussion with the legislature on trying to get out in front of that situation and maybe allow the division more opportunity to bid, or maybe if it's between state agencies, give the division preference on purchasing the property?
Yeah, so I will speak first to the question specifically about SITLA. So the Trust Lands Administration, just this last legislative session, there was a bill that came out that said that there's now an exception to their advertising requirements. So SITLA can now sell or lease blocks of more than 5,000 acres, with the exclusion of Tabby Mountain, to DNR if DNR pays fair market value for the block. So essentially, the new law does allow for a direct sale from the Trust Lands Administration to DNR at fair market value. So that situation we got in for Cinnamon Creek is a good example where that property was put on the open market and it was advertised and it was put up for auction. While there still are administrative rules that need to be established by the Trust Lands Administration, this new law does allow for that direct sale, not on the open market, to happen, if that makes sense. Okay. And then just to kind of chat a little bit more about that outbidding situation. So I think that there are a couple of exceptions to that appraisal and fair market requirement within the administrative rule as it stands, and we propose to keep that in as that exception with the proposed changes. Cinnamon Creek, I think, is a really good example of a time where we had to use that exception to the appraisal rule because of that auction situation. So the division used our best judgment on creating what we thought was fair market value when we put in our bid. So we do have the opportunity to use these exceptions to those rules. They are limited, but that was a situation where there was bidding taking place. And so maybe we did need to put up a little bit more than fair market value to get that piece of property. So that's an example where we did use that exception to the appraisal rule. But overall, I think with the exception of that isolated situation, landowners have been incredibly understanding about our requirement to pay fair market value. Most of the folks that we work with on land acquisitions understand why we can only pay fair market value for fairness, and especially when it comes to spending taxpayers' dollars and Fish and Wildlife Service money. And so we've been really fortunate to not come into situations where landowners are putting us in a position where we might have to outbid somebody else.
Okay, thank you. Other questions from the board? Questions from RAC chairs? Any questions? Well, we'll ask the director, Shirley, to summarize the online comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Agenda item 6, R657-61, valuation of real property interests. We just had one vote, and that somewhat agreed with the division's proposal and didn't add any additional comments. So that's all we had. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll ask for the RAC chairs to give us their motions. We'll start with you, Austin.
In the southern region, we had just one motion, and that was to accept as presented from the proposal, and that passed unanimously.
Thank you. Grizz?
We also had just one motion in the northeastern region, and that was accept as presented by the division, and that passed unanimously.
Thank you. Eric?
Southeastern RAC also passed unanimously the division's proposal. Central region had a motion to accept as presented, and that passed unanimously.
Thanks, Brock. Brad?
Northern region also had a motion to pass as presented, that passed unanimously.
Thank you. All right. I'll summarize them. They were all passed unanimous. That was easy. All right. We'll bring it back to the board for discussion. Any discussion prior to calling for a motion on this one? I'll call for a motion.
Move we pass it as presented.
Second. So Bryce had a motion to accept the valuation of real property interest proposal as presented, seconded by Kent. All in favor. We'll start with down on this end. Brett?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you. Motion's unanimous. Thank you. Okay, Kenny Johnson, we'll ask you to come up, and the next action item is the conservation permit audit. Kenny Johnson, our Administrative Services Section Chief.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, board members and RAC chairs and members of the public. I'm Kenny Johnson, the admin chief based in Salt Lake City, and we have completed our 2024 audit of the conservation program. While we're waiting for those slides, I hope Paul has them. I will just say I want to extend thanks to my staff for helping work through this, and especially the conservation groups and their admin staff that help us put this together and review the records and the audit this year. So things were relatively clean, and we'll just jump right into the conservation report. So for those who don't know, I think most people in the room are familiar. The program essentially consists of a small percentage of our permits that are awarded to our conservation partners. And these conservation permits bring in critical revenue for wildlife and habitat projects around the state. These partners, it's important to note that while we do generate the funds from this, they also bring a tremendous amount of boots on the ground and support to make these projects work. And so that's a really big deal and a huge part of this program. And Covey will talk more about that in his report. Just really quick slide of who those partners are at the moment. So I don't know if I need to read them all, but Mule Deer Foundation, National Wild Turkey Federation, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, Safari Club International, Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife, Utah Archery Association, Utah Houndsman Association, Utah Wild Sheep Foundation, and Wildlife Conservation Foundation. And those were the ones we worked with to do our reconciliations and review this year. So this year, 311 permits were awarded to our partners. That's less than 2% of all permits. These permits are then marketed and auctioned off to maximize their return for wildlife. And that revenue total this year was just a little bit more than $8.3 million in 24. So the revenue from the program obviously goes to division approved projects, and it's allocated 30% of the revenues returned directly to the DWR. 60% is retained by the group for DWR approved projects, and the conservation groups can keep 10% for admin overhead. The audit essentially does these four major things. We look to make sure that expenditures for projects were approved before any of the work starts, that all the funds are kept separate in federally insured bank accounts, that the permit prices at the banquets match what gets reported back to my team, and that invoices are paid on time and project revenues are expended prior to the deadline 2 years after it's collected. So some of our audit findings this year, we looked at 168 permits specifically to compare the auction price with what was reported later, and those matched 100%. There were no discrepancies there. We ran an exception report that kind of looks for variation in pricing year to year, either up or down, and kind of flags it for us to review a little bit deeper and find out what may be happening on some of those permits, and there were no disparities in that review this year. There was 100% compliance with the project pre-approval process. All the funds were verified in separate and secure bank accounts. There were a few little housekeeping items if you read down through the list of letters that were unreconciled at the time of the audit, just usually small balances here and there, bank fees and things that needed to be adjusted either during the audit window or just taken care of after. And they're usually, $10 here and there for a weird little bank fee. There was one finding with the Utah Houndsman Association. At the time we submitted the audit, when we did our review, they had not spent their retained portion of the 2022 revenue before the deadline that was required in rule. And so we worked with them, and they have since submitted that and resolved that finding entirely. So that's been taken care of. And then just some general feedback for everybody. The groups just should be mindful of the deadlines. That's we've had really good compliance, really good help getting the audit documents in and reviewed and taken care of on time. If the organizations had any permit proceeds that weren't deposited at the time of the audit, so those very end permits that get sold, some of those are verified as checks and not deposited, and we just make sure those are deposited, and that was really rare. All the accrued interest should be left in the account. Interest, again, just as a reminder, goes towards projects now, so any interest that gets accrued goes to fund projects. And then when bank fees exceed interest earned, the bank fees need to come out of the group's 10% or just covered by an additional deposit. And this is just our executive summary. I think you guys have seen this one. And really the point of keeping this slide in here, I know it's sort of busy. You can see each organization down the left, their carryover revenue from last year, and then all the new project revenue for this year, interest and donations there in the middle, and then the total revenue available for the audit year. And then this second to last column is just project expenditures during the audit period, so this year. And so for me, it's exciting because you can see that those funds are being collected and then spent in the cadence we expected. And this has brought a lot of transparency to the program. And you can see that, I don't want to take any thunder from Covey, but I think there were almost 460 projects in queue that these funds were taken care of, and you can kind of see that in the totals along the bottom. And that is all I have, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Kenny. I really, really, really appreciate the transparency on this one. On the slide we just saw, it didn't show the letters and all the work behind the fact that you did with each one of the conservation groups and our partners there. And but it does show the effort that you went through and what had to the modifications, changes made through the audit, and I really appreciate that. That's this project is, or this program is so beneficial to our state. It's really incredibly beneficial, but it's also the interest here in the public is big time. So the transparency there is very, very important, and appreciate that very much. Thank you. All right, questions for Kenny? Not having questions. Any questions by the RAC chairs? I know you guys didn't talk about this in your group, so.
I have a question. Is that executive summary available online for the public to see?
It is. In fact, it just depends on the timing. We try to circulate it to you guys if we have it in advance, and I probably just missed it this year, but it is in the RAC packet and online.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So this isn't a topic that went to the RACs, so I won't ask them for their RAC reports. Do we have any online comment?
No, we don't. We didn't have any public comment on this item.
Thank you. We do have one comment card. Angie, you'll come up and spend some time with us.
Hi, I'm Angie Monicott, representing Sportsmen's for Fish and Wildlife. I drew the short straw. Troy made it to Alaska, and I got to come here. So I just really just wanted to say thank you to the division for allowing us to be one of the participants. And Sarah is amazing. She's the one that we get to deal with to do the audit. So we just appreciate all that you guys do. Thank you.
Thank you, Angie. And I am told that Sarah does a ton to help, so good for her. Okay, to the board we had board for discussion. All right, entertain a motion.
Make a motion, we approve as accepted.
Do you have a second? Motion by Bryce to approve the audit on the conservation permit audit as presented, seconded by Brett. Let's start on your end down there, Kent. Yes.
I'm going to recuse.
Yes.
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 It's unanimous with one recusal. Okay. Thank you, Kenny. Next thing is Covey is up with the conservation permit annual report. Covey Jones, our wildlife section chief.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. With that, we'll talk about the other part to the conservation permits. So Kenny presents the majority of the financial part, and although we include some of that at the end of the conservation permit report, this is a report where we discuss what we're doing with those funds and how they impact wildlife. I do want to make a note. First of all, there is Appendix 1 in the report. That appendix is also found in the audit. And after we submitted it for the board, we found a small error in that. Before we post that online, it'll be corrected. So the one in the audit is correct now, and we'll update the one in the report before we post it online. Okay, so the conservation permit program, it started with desert bighorn sheep in the 80s. We had a we've talked about this a lot. We had a small remnant population of bighorn sheep in the state in the southeastern region. And those sheep, we had enough of them there where we could start distributing them back across the landscape. At one point in time, when the pioneers first settled Utah, bighorn sheep were the predominant big game animal across the state. And so having just this one small remnant population and being able to start and work through what restoration looked like was exciting, but we didn't have the funding to do it. And so there was an idea from one of the groups to sell a bighorn permit. And from that one bighorn permit, it raised $20,000. The first transplant happened, and the program evolved from there. So it's since 2001, which has been the model of the current program, it's generated more than $88 million for transplants, captures, and things like that. So the last couple years, you can see we issued right around just over 311 conservation permits is what was issued last year. The number of conservation permits issued is directly related to the number of public permits on a unit. So you can have a maximum of 8 conservation permits per unit, and you can't have a conservation permit until you hit your first one is at 11. So 11 permits is 1. And then every so many permits after that, you get another one up to a maximum of 8. Kenny presented this. These are the groups that were involved, and we appreciate the partnerships that we have with all of these groups and all of our sportsmen, honestly. And then this shows the revenue generated. So last year, generated just over $8.3 million for wildlife conservation. And let's look at what that translates into on the ground. So Utah has the most aggressive big game capture and monitoring program in the nation. Last year, we were able to capture and collar almost 1,800 big game animals. And this helps us better understand what the limiting factors are for those animals. What areas on the landscape they prefer, what their fat levels are when we catch them because of the areas they use, what animals are skinny, what animals are fat, what animals are having better reproduction and why. And it allows us to do a lot of really special, intricate studies too, where we're able to look at mule deer survival, but also able to look at like the second one down there, a neonate study. We're not just looking at, fawns at 6 months old and through 18 months old, but we're looking at that 0 to 6 month. These are extremely labor intensive and extremely expensive. And we're able to get that first 6 months survival, find out what the limiting factors are there, and then try to address those to increase the production in our mule deer herds. We have the top study, mule deer survival and nutritional condition monitoring. That study has been going with GPS collar since 2014. It's the biggest mule deer data set in the world. It's helping us again address what limiting factors are on different units. What animals are fat, what animals are suffering from elevated predation rates, and to know how to grow stronger, more robust mule deer herds. Finally, the one on the bottom there, we're able to establish a desert bighorn sheep nursery facility with the help of our partners. SFW and Wild Sheep were big players in this one. And we were able to put that out on Promontory where it's been successful. Not without trials everywhere, but it's been successful out there. So the data we gather from the collaring projects then translates into habitat projects. And this is really it's coming full circle, right? We collar animals, we find out needs, and then we translate that back into habitat projects of where do we need to work, what do we need to improve, what do we need to do better. And you can see last year there were over 76,000 acres of projects that had conservation permit funding in it. If you just look at the Watershed Restoration Initiative, which is another big initiative that the division runs, there were a total of 52 projects. If you go to the individual species, This includes Watershed Restoration Initiative and Habitat Council. So there are actually 65 mule deer projects, but that's because it's including some of the Habitat Council projects, which are, again, above what's just in the Watershed Restoration Initiative. But a lot of specific projects for species on the landscape. And just some of the examples, we just finished all the prep work on the South Manti project. All of the NEPA is done, and now we're ready to be able to have some high elevation restoration, including mechanical treatments and wildfires. And the South Manti has been an area that the deer population down there struggled. They've been fat and showed elevated predation rates, and we've addressed that through harvest of mountain lions and other things. But now we're in a place where, as that population grows, we want to make sure that we have the habitat for them. So that's one we're really excited about. And then the Salina Creek Phase 5, again, a lot of work done there to help bolster primarily mule deer. I'm trying to remember, I think it's like 8,000 acres of treatments in that Salina Creek project. And that's all I have for today.
Thank you, Kobe. Questions by board members?
I did have one question. I saw that a lot of, like, going through the list of all the projects that conservation organizations are funding. On one of them, one that kept showing up quite a bit was the Utah Wildlife Migration Initiative. And I'm just curious what that is and what you're finding out and what's the action items that come from that.
Awesome. Do you have, Seth, or you got it? Sweet. Thanks, Paul. So we have a website that discusses what the migration initiative is. This website's open to the public, and everything on here is open to the public. But as you can see, just scroll down. This is live. It pulls right from our database. So far we've tracked, back up a little, sorry. We've tracked almost 11,800 animals, and that's over 57 million point locations. Okay, and this is how that translates. And then 60 wildlife crossings in association with that. And here's one example of how that translates. Paul, if you go to animals, the animals pull down, go to land animals, and then go to corridors. And if you scroll down to right here, okay, so there are some of the mule deer corridors that we've mapped and have available for our partners and everybody to use. Again, this data is up on the website. Anybody can come and look at this, these heat maps and things associated with that. But now when we have a question about, okay, we're going to do a project, a UDOT project in this area of the state, or when the county wants to know, hey, we want to change and have a solar farm here, or we want oil and gas development. I mean, we understand that wildlife has to exist in harmony with a ton of other things that happen on the landscape. But the Utah Migration Initiative can say, okay, if we're going to do that project, we'd like you to do it and avoid these areas if possible. These areas are really key to wildlife. This area over here, not as much, and we can mitigate that. But if we could avoid these areas, or, hey, deer are here, but they're not here until October 20th. So if we could hold off when we hit about October 15th, if we could pull out and stop that disturbance, that would be helpful to wildlife and to these animals. It helps us understand what landscapes are fragmented and by what, and where animals naturally want to cross. So after we understand the fragmentation and where they want to cross, then we can work with UDOT to install crossings, overpasses, underpasses. This really is the most advanced thing that's happened in wildlife management in the last 100 years, since the beginning of wildlife management. And really all the Migration Initiative does for a suite of species, not just big game. There's upland game in there, there's waterfowl in there, there are fish in there. It helps understand what their barriers are and how we overcome those to have more healthy landscapes, more healthy wildlife populations, and better connectivity. It's awesome. If you haven't been on the website, it's a fun place to go and look and play around. As you can see, from Paul, you can do a lot. So anyway, hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. I just appreciate that. A lot of them we worked on this drainage or we did this habitat. So this one was more broad. I just grateful or thank you for explaining what that entails.
Other questions for Kobe? Question by rack chairs. Any questions for Kobe? Okay, we have one comment card. Corey, going to come up.
Hi, Corey Huntsman with the Utah Houndsman Association. We support the conservation permit program. And I think, the biggest argument for sportsmen have for doing what we do is conservation dollars spent that keeps animals on the landscape. And the conservation permit program adds $88 million to that argument. But more than that, I've had the opportunity to take my kids on several conservation permit funded projects and show them that conservation is more than just buying a hunting and fishing license. They've got to go on several ungulate, bear, lion, neonate collarings, captures. They've got to release pheasants on WMAs, and they've even got to go on elk classifications. So anybody that's skeptical of the conservation permit program, I'd strongly encourage them to get a hold of their regional biologist and go on some of these projects and see the benefits of the full circle of this conservation program. Thanks.
Thank you, Corey. Okay, was there any comments on this? No online comments on this one. And this was not a rack item, so we don't have to talk about any motions there. Well, it comes back to the board. Any discussion on the conservation annual permit? Okay, I'll ask for a motion.
I move we accept the conservation permit annual report as presented.
Second. Motion by Brett to accept, seconded by Kent. All in favor? We'll start down up here with Brett.
Yes.
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 Recuse.
Yes.
Very good. We got four supports and one recusal. Thank you. Appreciate that, Colby.
Thank you.
Item number 9, the Expo permit audit. Kitty Johnson again.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. And I think this format is nice to do these both in one meeting. We used to do one in August, one in September, and this makes it easier to get it done in one meeting. So yes, we have completed our review of the Expo for 2024. And again, a lot of work goes into this one with my staff and the contractor. So we'll just jump right into this one and talk through it. Quick background, Rule R657-55 started this program in 2005. It provides up to 200 limited entry permits for a variety of species that have to be issued at a wildlife expo that attracts at least 10,000 people each year. And the purpose is to help fund wildlife conservation initiatives on the ground in Utah. So the first expo was held back in 2007. The board obviously approves the permits annually, and then those permits are issued through a random process with an application fee of $5 per permit. And then we kind of do our annual compliance audit to just make sure that the 5 or 6 things outlined are being followed and taken care of. And we'll jump right into that. So the current contract is from 2022 to 26, and 2 partners essentially work on the expo together, Sportsmen for Fish and Wildlife and the Mule Deer Foundation. And they distribute the permits at the Western Hunting and Conservation Expo. And this audit will cover last year's expo. So the scope is essentially these 5 bullets. We want to make sure that the data, one of my big concerns is always the data, that it's properly handled and secure, that the programming for applications when they do the drawing is random and unbiased, that the selected applicants were verified for eligibility before they get a permit. There's a lot of things we check for there. That the retained revenue was accounted for appropriately, and that the project revenue was expended or transferred in the time allotted per rule. So after the expo winds down, we held the draw in Salt Lake in our headquarters, and we had technical representatives from the Department of Government Operations look at the coding and go through it top to bottom and make sure it was random and unbiased, and that there couldn't be anything weird populated into the results table. And so that happened this year, and it was a thorough review, and we didn't see any issues with the coding used for the draw. The contractor knew this year the PCI, so the payment card industry standard form, was updated to like envelop a few more new standards, and so they complied and got us the new PCI self-assessment, and ran some scans on their system before taking any applications. That one's always a big one for me to make sure they are helping there. And then, so we do believe that appropriate measures were taken to ensure that the system and the data were secure, and we didn't see any compliance issues with any part of that. This slide was getting a little bit busy. This is just kind of a history of the year of the expo applications broken out by resident and non-resident, and then the gross revenue at $5 per app on the far right here. I'll let you guys look at that one for just a minute or two to see. The next slide, I'm gonna show it in more of a graph form, and it probably makes a little more sense. And so you can kind of just see the different axes here. Applications on the left, applicants here on the right, and then the year obviously across the bottom. And nothing super out of the normal there. I think the interesting thing, you can all see the COVID bump, that big spike. We see that in all of our data now, fishing, hunting. When we're looking at licenses, we see that giant COVID bump when everybody got excited and apparently could go fishing more than work. You see that little bit of a bump, and then it looks like applicants now are putting in, on average, a few more applications when they apply for the expo. So they're applying for more hunts. So the retained revenue, there's two parts of this. $1.50 of each application is for division approved projects, and $3.50 for contractor approved projects or initiatives that they work on in partnership with the division. You can see the breakout there. It was $6.95 for the $1.50 retained revenue, and 1.6 on the $3.50. We verified that the fund balances were deposited and held separately in federally insured accounts. And then these work similar to conservation. The groups have 2 years to expend or transfer those funds to division approved projects before the deadline 2 years later. And there were no issues with that again this year. This is a table of the $1.50. You can see the Mule Deer Foundation SFW on the left, their carryover revenue from last year, and then the new split of revenue this year, all that was available, and then their actual expenditures. And so same, it's super efficient to tie this to the project list and to watch the revenue come in and get spent out at about the same ratio or even ahead of schedule is good. And then so the $3.50, again, we verified that those were deposited appropriately. About $400,000 of that was spent on appropriate things to take applications and process applications, do the draw, those kinds of things at the expo. They're eligible expenses. They were all verified with receipts and backup documentation by our staff. And then the leftover 1.2 was split 50-50, and each group got about 600,000 of that. And that that is tied to that list of projects in attachment 2 in the board packet. And then so overall, here's the 350 accounts. So again, same program here. Carryover plus new gives you the total minus the expenditures in the current audit year, and then the verified bank balance that we go through them with on that last column. And then just a couple other bits of information. So applicants had to validate in person. I think that's, we just had the one exception here, the COVID year, where we didn't have to have you validate in person. This year, we're back to that, obviously. And then applicants all have to have a hunting or combination license to apply for expo permits. And then just in conclusion, we feel like they did a really good job ensuring that the data was kept safe, got through the PCI requirements, no problem before accepting applications. The programming code was good. Project revenue requirements were each met either on time or ahead of schedule. And then all of those deposits were verified as separate insured bank accounts. And again, you know, the list continues to grow. We just keep seeing the expo project list grow and grow, and it's been used for hundreds of beneficial projects with more to come, I think, in the future. And we didn't have any other findings or recommendations this year.
Thank you, Kenny. Great report. Comments or questions for Kenny?
I know that takes a lot of time and effort, so thank you to your office for taking care of that, and on this end, the conservation side.
Thank you.
And again, this one is watched over pretty close by the public, and so that transparency is very greatly appreciated. Thank you. Okay. We have one comment to Angie.
And Angie Wanacott from Sportsman's for Fish and Wildlife. And we just want to thank again the division for letting us participate in this and all the work that Sarah puts into it as well. We just want to also say that the expo permit dollars are extremely critical as well as the conservation ones. The expo dollars allow us to help on other projects, specifically like waterfowl and upland, that the conservation dollar permits can't be used for. So just wanted to say thanks to all of you guys.
Thank you, Angie. Thank you to MDF and SFW for all the work they do putting on that. That is a giant thing to have to do, and great for benefits our entire state. I don't believe there's any online comments on this one either, so we'll bring back to the board for discussion.
Just an interesting comment. It's kind of like looking through the trend. Every year has gone up. Do you think we're going to hit a plateau, or will it just keep going?
Sure. We wondered that in our own draw, right? Like we keep expecting to see if there's a ceiling out there, and Utah's recruiting people, and I think we don't have a lot of people leave Utah. So yeah, the trends are positive right now, and I think likely to keep growing even if they slow down a little bit.
Yeah, I think I saw it was 64,000 attendance at the expo this year. Is that correct?
Yep, that's about right.
That's a lot of people coming into Salt Lake. So good.
Kenny, I know I haven't heard it this year, but I know last year I heard quite a bit of it about the requirement for having them being there in person to, I guess, finish their application for these. And I understand the need for it for the, we need them to support the convention also, but can you just speak on that just a little bit?
Yeah, I think, Randy, the original intent was to definitely draw a crowd to Salt Lake and get them excited about wildlife early on, and having them come and validate that app in person helps facilitate that. So I think that's the reason and why we want to continue to have them do that.
Any other questions, comments for Kenny? I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the expo permit audit.
I'll second it.
Motion by Kent to approve the expo audit as presented, seconded by Gary. Kent, we'll start down on your end.
Yes.
I'll recuse, and just a little background. I do work for conservation organizations. So that is my reason for recusal, and I do help with the expo. So a lot of this I'm familiar with, but that's the reason for my recusals.
Thank you, Paula.
Yes.
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 Unanimous with one recusal. Thank you. Thank you, Kenny. Item number 10 is the expo permit allocation. Covey.
Okay, so every year, it states that we'll bring these permits to the board for approval. Again, Kenny's gone over this, but the expo really is, it's another public draw opportunity in the state of Utah, right? And I understand there's different sentiments around the expo and whatever we do, but the expo does positive is it highlights the importance of wildlife in our state. And the value that it has for our citizens. There's a lot of excitement around it. And there's a lot of, I mean, it happens at a time where, it happens when our legislature's in session, and a lot of folks can see how important our wildlife is in our state to the citizens of our state. It's pretty cool that we have something like this in our state. So with that, we'll just go through the permit adjustments. So what you're seeing here is every year we bring the expo permits to the board, and as we have plan changes and change the opportunities that we offer in our other public draw, the division's public draw, we just try to mimic that in what we offer up in expo permits. So you'll see some new hunts, and you'll see where permits have increased or decreased, permit numbers go up and down. So proposed changes in deer, removing a few deer permits. The trends in mule deer over the last several years have been fewer permits offered to the public. So as we evaluated that, we're recommending to remove a few deer permits from the expo permit draw. Some proposed changes in elk. And this is a little different. This is just a permit decreases sheet, and the next one will be the permits we've added in. So recommending to discontinue and reduce a few hunts here. Just let everybody look at that for a second. And then recommending some new hunts and some permit increases. So the elk plan came up with the late hunt now exists on every elk unit, the late rifle, any weapon elk hunt. So recommending a few of those. There's a new late archery hunt that occurs, it's limited entry, that occurs in December. And we'd like to try that, recommending that as well in the expo. And then just moving some permits around to different seasons. And pronghorn. Pronghorn is an area where we've had quite a bit of increase in buck hunting opportunity over the last few years. And so recommending some overall increases in pronghorn permits here. The Diamond Mountain Bonanza, a new hunt there with 3 permits. And then the hunt on the Parker is back. And so recommending to bring that back, where we had some population struggle in the Northeast Utah, that cash rich unit, recommending to discontinue that for the expo. There's still 200 permits, and all the rest of the permits are the same, excluding these changes that we presented today. That's all.
Question for Kobe?
I tried to pick up on it when you're burning through the slides, but how many late archery elk tags are you going to increase it? Is it just like the Wasatch and look like one other? But
Yeah, I think there was, let me go back to that. That's a really good question.
there's one on Wasatch.
Yeah, there's one on Wasatch, and then there's one on Beaver East as well. So a couple of those new late hunts.
Okay.
They're going to be hard, but it's a limited entry opportunity. It's another chance to hunt elk. Hunting should be hard. Like, go hunt.
Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions for Kobe? The rack chairs have any questions? Not seeing any. No online comments, I'm sure. We have no comment cards on this one. So we will go to board discussion. I didn't see anything in this one that caught my attention as being, some good changes and some new opportunities in different areas. Same number of permits, so. All right, call for a motion.
I move we accept the expo permit allocation as presented.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Got a motion by Brett to accept conservation allocation as presented, second by Kent. Start with Brett.
Yes.
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 I don't know if I need to recuse this one. I don't have any financial interest in how many permits are allocated where, but just to stay consistent, I guess I'll recuse.
Thanks, Paula.
Yes.
It's unanimous with one recusal. Thank you.
Thank
you, Kobe. And how would we have a meeting without Chad coming up and talking to us? Chad just loves us so much. So Chad Wilson, our private lands public wildlife coordinator, talk about the LOA committee.
Yeah, and I'm hoping this one goes smooth enough that I didn't even bring my laptop up here with me. So yeah, a while back, so Chad Wilson, private lands public wildlife coordinator out of the Salt Lake office. A while back, we approved an LOA committee to be formed, and we brought names to the wildlife board. Those were approved, and at this time, Scoot isn't going to be able to, Scoot Flannery's not going to be able to be part of that committee. So we're recommending that Eric Luke be put into his place representing the racks. So yeah, pretty straightforward.
Eric, you okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
He asked, he talked to me beforehand.
All right. Okay.
I'd say we make him leave the room while we talk about him.
I say we leave him here.
I almost made him stand.
Very good. Very good. Any discussion? We'll call for a motion.
I make a motion that we approve the change.
Second.
Motion by Paula, second by Bryce. Start with you down there, Kent.
Yes.
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 You're successful, Eric. Thank you. Appreciate you joining that group. It'd be great opportunity, great group. Okay, and thank you, Chad. Maybe next time you won't have to be here. We'll see. Next thing is Stacy is going to come up and talk about the 2025 rack and board meeting dates.
Hello, I'm Stacy Coons. I'm the Wildlife Board Coordinator, and I'm here to present your 2025 meeting dates, which were all in your packet. We stayed very similar to this year. I shifted a couple of them due to holidays. I didn't think any of you wanted to spend Thanksgiving with me, so I moved a few in November. But aside from that, they're all basically in the same area. A couple of highlights. Next year is WAFWA, and Utah is the host state. So you'll notice June 2nd through the 6th, is on your calendar. That will be in Provo, and all board members are invited to attend that. We shifted a few in December to accommodate WAFWA as well, but other than that, they're straightforward. And then just as a reminder and a slight plug for next year, 2025 is a recruitment year. So we will be replacing 3 seats on the Wildlife Board and numerous seats on the RACs. So for those of you who've just had childhood dreams of wearing the Wildlife Board jacket, now's the time to dust off your resume, because we are going to open that application January 1st, and it will run until the end of February. It is a slightly lengthy process, so I'm going to give people the heads up on that now. The application is at the beginning of the year, but by the time we go through the Wildlife Board Nominating Committee and the names are submitted to the governor's office, the appointment actually doesn't get confirmed by the Senate until June. And then that board member starts in August of next year. So there's a long time frame there. But for those of you who are interested, January is when you'll see that application open, and it is on the governor's website. And if you have issues finding it, you can contact me and I'll help you out with that. As far as RAC membership, we do not open that recruitment until March. So if you have dreams of applying for both, we allow for that. So that happens in March, and then those appointments become effective July 1st. So your meetings start July, August as well. So that's the dates, unless you have any questions.
Thank you, Stacy. Any questions for Stacy? Yeah, I think I heard the last board chair that is now gone say that if you've got too many friends, apply for the board. It'll help. It'll help
That
with
will
that.
definitely weed them out.
No, it's great. It's a great opportunity. So we call for a motion on this one.
I'll make a motion to accept the board schedule for 2025.
I'll second.
Motion made by Kent, second by Paula. We'll start with you, Kent.
Yes.
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 Passes unanimous. Thank you, Stacy.
Thank you.
And is there any other business that we need to talk about today? That's the last thing on our agenda item. Yep. Okay. Director.
I just wanted to mention one thing really fast. I didn't check my email this morning before the meeting and should have added to the director update that we still have any bull elk permits available. And that's pretty historical. We still have some with the distribution of permits and the change of the elk plan. That's really eased up on the concern. So if people still want to go hunt elk in October on that early season, there are permits available, and people should take the opportunity to go have a good time on the any bull units.
Thank you.
Yep.
Any other discussion today? I'll call for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
I'll second it.
Motion made by Gary, second by Brett. We'll start down here with you, Brett. Oh, yeah.
Yes.
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 Thank you. And Stacy, is lunch over there? Is it a box lunch type thing again? No. So lunch is all right. Everybody's invited. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you all being here today.